Hello everyone! In this series of videos, we will talk about some tools for giving academic presentations in English. The presence of an audience makes two important things possible: feedback and discussion. It gives a chance for you as a speaker to incorporate observations and ideas from other people. Engaging with a live audience is different in some ways from engaging with a reader. Effective presentations tend to be more conversational in tone and lose some of the formality of academic writing. However, some academic conventions remain important, such as always mentioning sources of information and being clear about your main idea and the reasoning behind it. How can we make the best use of this chance to test our ideas with an audience? There are several things to consider, such as the content of the talk, its physical delivery, the use of visual aids, and the role of the audience. Let's look at these in turn and see how different aspects can be put to use by watching parts of sample presentations. You'll see parts of two sample presentations, one arguing against the use of nuclear energy from a humanities perspective, and the other reporting on an experiment about wind power generation. Chapter 1: Content and Organization for Presentations in Humanities and Social Sciences. Papers in the humanities and social sciences cover a wide range of academic styles, but they all have one thing in common. They will all have a beginning, middle, and end. So will your presentation. Interest your audience by helping them understand why your topic is important. Provide an overall background of the topic. Show the significance of the issue using concrete evidence or real-life examples. State your position clearly at the beginning. Give a preview of your main arguments to help your audience follow your presentation.
In this talk, I will argue for the abolishment of nuclear energy.
For oral presentations, select the best arguments from your paper to explain. One way of doing this is to use the point, reason, evidence, point format.
One of the main arguments for abolishing nuclear energy focuses on nuclear waste. Nuclear waste is a problem because it is highly radioactive and extremely harmful to anything living, and will remain so for thousands of years. According to the World Nuclear Association, one of the main waste products of nuclear energy, plutonium-239, has a half-life of 24,000 years. It is dangerous for us and for future generations.
For each argument, state the point first. State the corresponding reasons. Support your point with evidence. Restate your point. In a presentation, it is always good to remind your audience of your point. To help your audience keep the main points of your talk in their head and think about its broader context, it can be useful to finish by repeating the main points and mention what this might lead toward, thinking ahead into the future. And of course, since this is an academic context, show where the information you presented comes from. The only thing then is to throw it over to the audience. It is their turn now.
So I conclude that we should abandon nuclear power in favor of renewable energy.
Restate your position. Summarize the selected arguments justifying your position. State implications for the future. Show your references. Thank the audience for their attention and invite comments or questions.
Thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to your comments and questions, and I'll respond as best I can.
Chapter 2: Presentation Delivery. The content of your presentation is important, but to give the content the best chance of being understood and engaged with by the audience, there are a number of things to think about in terms of the delivery itself. Think of these as different tools that you can use to help your audience. They include pausing, intonation, speech rate, volume, body orientation, positioning, and gesture. Let's look at some sample presentations to explore how these tools can be put to use. Pauses allow the audience to consider a question or point. Plan ahead about where to pause. Commas and full stops are good clues.
I'm going to talk about nuclear energy. And more specifically, I'm going to argue that we shouldn't use it, and we should use renewable forms of energy instead. I think these two arguments are very strong, and they do need to be considered carefully. But I think they have flaws, as I explain now. The first argument commits a fallacy, which is known as the sunk cost fallacy.
Intonation can help your presentation to sound more interesting and lively, but also helps your audience to interpret your words. Intonation is a clue to meaning, so use this to make it easier for your audience to understand you.
I'm going to talk about nuclear energy, and more specifically, I'm going to argue that we shouldn't use it, and instead, we should use renewable forms of energy. I think these two arguments are very strong, and they do need to be considered carefully. But I think they have flaws, as I'll explain now. The first argument commits a fallacy which is known as the sunk cost fallacy.
Asking questions can make your presentation interesting and engaging. Clearly state questions with a proper intonation. A falling intonation is used for when, where, why, or how questions, while a rising intonation is used for questions that can be answered by yes or no.
So how do we investigate this? So are these data consistent with my hypothesis?
Like intonation, varying your speed can make your presentation sound more lively, but it can also help your audience understand. You may want to slow down, especially when you are introducing a new expression that your audience may not have heard before, so that they can hear it properly.
The first argument commits a fallacy which is known as the sunk cost fallacy.
And when you are indicating something on the graph, give your audience time to follow where you are pointing.
This graph shows my results. It summarizes the speed of the wind that reached the turbine, which is represented by the line graph in red, and the turbine's output, which is demonstrated by the blue bar graph.
Keep the back of the room in mind when you are thinking about how loud to speak. People won't understand you if they can't hear you.
I would like to present the results of my study. I would like to present the results of my study on the influence of obstacle layout on the efficiency.
When you are having a conversation with someone, how you stand communicates various things about your attitude towards the conversation and person you are talking to. It is the same when talking to a group of people as a presenter. But standing in front of an audience is not something we do often, so we don't have natural habits of how to stand or move. Here are some things to consider. Posture starts even before speaking and sets the tone of your message. Some things to remember are: face the audience in order to include them. Facing away can make an audience feel excluded.
In this talk, I will argue for the abolishment of nuclear energy. In this talk, I will argue for the abolishment of nuclear energy.
Leaning on furniture can make an audience think that you are not giving them your full energy.
The issue of nuclear energy is very divisive, especially perhaps in Japan. The issue of nuclear energy is very divisive, especially perhaps in Japan, given its rather unique experience with it.
When we are nervous, we often move about and sway. By staying relatively still, you automatically look more confident.
I'm going to talk about nuclear energy, and More specifically, I'm going to argue that we shouldn't use it. I'm going to talk about nuclear energy. And more specifically, I'm going to argue that we shouldn't use it.
You can direct the attention of the audience using your body. When you are talking about something on the screen, turn to include it in your field of vision, but keep the audience visible too, since you are still talking to them. When explaining something in the visual aid, point to it and use the hand nearest to the screen.
One thing I'd like to point out is the sudden increase in wind speed recorded at the 20 centimeter gap you can see at this point.
Use your hands or a pointer to lead the attention of your audience more specifically. When you are finished pointing out something on the screen, be sure to turn back to your audience fully. Gesturing can be a great aid for the audience to understand you better.
To test different configurations in different trials, we vary the distance between the two plastic bottles from 0 to 40 centimeters in 10 centimeter increments.
Keeping eye contact with your audience helps them feel connected to your presentation. Chapter 3. Visual Aids. A picture is worth 1,000 words and can enormously help your audience quickly understand the points you want to make. But there are various things to consider that can make your figures and other visual aids more effective. Font or text sizes need to be large enough for the audience to read easily. A uniform font style makes the presentation look unified. Pay attention to color combinations. Dark text on light backgrounds is recommended. Be careful of colorblind combinations. Some members of the audience may have some form of color blindness that makes it difficult to distinguish red and green or blue and yellow. Avoid these kinds of color combinations in your graphs. Use colors everyone can distinguish. Another option is by using different patterns to distinguish sets of data. Use text sparingly. Summarize, itemize, and highlight your points. Use pictures or diagrams to describe or emphasize. Check that the graphs are complete with a concise title, axis labels, and legends. For comparing data with two or more groups on a graph, make sure the groups are easily distinguishable by color, line styles, or type of graph. Cite borrowed figures. Check your spelling. Bring a backup of your presentation to the venue, such as on a memory stick. Finally, check your presentation at the venue, and you're ready. Chapter 4. Audience Engagement. There are many different kinds of presentations and reasons for presenting, but almost always the main purpose is to put an idea in front of other people to ask for their feedback. Whether you are the presenter or the audience member, you have an important role here. It is natural to be a little nervous about audience questions, since you cannot completely prepare for them. But on the other hand, unexpected questions from the audience are a vital way of gathering ideas for improving your reasoning and presentation. The discussion after your presentation is where this feedback will happen. So it is important to think about how to approach it, both as presenter and as audience. When you have finished your presentation, put the audience at ease to ask questions. Let them know that you are interested in their questions or opinions.
Thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to your comments and questions, and I'll respond as best I can.
Before answering the question, thank the person who asked it.
Thanks for your question. Yes, I agree that there are other arguments for using nuclear energy.
We often don't understand the question. This is normal. Don't be afraid to ask that the question be repeated or paraphrased.
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. Could you rephrase it?
It often helps to show the relevant slides again.
Okay, let me show you the slide again. I think this is the part of my talk you are asking about. As you can see in this graph,
After responding, confirm that you have answered the question.
does that answer your question?
Sometimes, you will not know how to answer the question immediately. This is natural, and there are various reasons for it. Do not panic. Here are some situations where the speaker doesn't have an answer. Sometimes the question is outside the area of your talk, but relevant and you are interested in finding out the answer yourself, so mention this.
My present study only focused on the wind speed and energy output of the turbines, and not actually on turbulence. But in fact, this is the next topic of my investigation. So hopefully I'll be able to answer your question sometime soon.
A question might reveal a potential problem with your method or reasoning. This is an ideal question, which helps your research the most. It is okay not to have an answer on the spot.
To be honest, in our planning for the experiment, we didn't consider the texture of the obstacles. But I can see why that could make a difference. I'm glad you pointed that out. It's actually an interesting question. I'll make sure we look at that.
Sometimes the question is outside the area of your talk, and also you do not think it is relevant. Explain this to the questioner.
Solar energy is definitely an important thing to consider. However, our research has been focused on wind energy and trying to increase its cost efficiency. I'm not sure of the latest research on solar energy.
If you are in the audience, remember that the presenter is very interested in your feedback. It can be very helpful to write down brief notes while you are listening to a presentation. You can even write down possible questions that you might want to ask. Note down slide titles or slide numbers, if that will be useful to let the speaker know which part of their talk you are asking about. There are many kinds of questions you can ask in the Q&A session. If you did not understand something the speaker said, you are probably not the only one. And as a speaker, it is helpful to know which parts of your presentation are difficult to understand. Ask the speaker to explain further something that they said.
I'm not sure I understood you on one point. I was a bit confused about your explanation of the fallacy.
The speaker probably had to leave out a lot of information to fit the presentation within the time allotted. Ask the speaker to fill in one of these gaps.
I wanted to ask, if we decide not to use nuclear power anymore, how much does it cost to decommission a nuclear power plant?
You may think that the speaker was wrong about some matter of fact or logic. It is always okay to challenge the speaker if you think this. The main purpose of their presentation is to gather feedback on precisely this point. In this case, it is important to be polite and respectful. Remember that it might be you who has made the error.
I'm not sure I agree with you, but thank you for that answer.
Often, you might ask a question but do not understand the answer. This is very common. Do not be afraid to tell the speaker that you didn't understand their answer. It might help to rephrase the question in case the misunderstanding came from there.
I don't quite understand your answer. If it can't be decided, how are you able to say that it's too risky?
There will often be a moderator to help the question and answer period run smoothly. If you are the moderator, here are some things to consider. The moderator's role is to set things so that everyone can understand what will be happening. For example, introduce the speaker and topic, and explain that there will be time for discussion at the end.
Thank you everyone for coming. And thanks very much to our speaker, Taro Yamada, who is going to talk to us about the issue of nuclear energy.
Thank the speaker for their talk and invite questions. You might have to start the Q&A session yourself if the audience is taking time to think of questions.
Thank you for that interesting talk. If anyone has a question or a comment for our speaker, please raise your hand.
Keep an eye out for misunderstandings, and if you can, help the speaker and questioner to understand one another.
I think the point of the question is that even if you're right, we might have to choose between nuclear and fossil fuels, at least for the next 10 years, while we build wind and solar plants. Is that right?
Time is valuable. If the session is expected to finish at a certain time, it is your job to make sure it does. Thank the speaker for their talk and the audience for their participation and attention.
It looks as though we're out of time. Thanks very much, everyone, for your great questions. And I'm sure you'll all join me in thanking our speaker for an interesting talk and invigorating discussion. Thank you very much.
A spoken presentation is an excellent way to receive feedback on your paper, get ideas from others, and learn how to explain your thoughts more effectively. The principles I have mentioned in this video are not meant to be a set of rules, just a set of tools. Feel free to adjust your presentation depending on the situation, your personality, and your particular audience. Like any discussion, be flexible. And of course, practice